Vans just re-released the Era again, but this time they released it in two versions, and the differences between them are way more interesting than a $10 price gap. On the outside, they look almost identical. Same silhouette, same colorways, same Era branding. Most people walking past them on a shelf wouldn't know the difference between which is which. And on the inside, they're allegedly built completely differently, and Vans is claiming that their new Waffle Cup solves the oldest argument in skateboarding. Cupsole or Volk, protection or Boardfeel. Pick one, but you get everything in a single shoe for $10 more. So we're gonna cut both in half to find out if that claim is true, and to see what the actual differences are between these two shoes, because tons of people have been asking, and honestly, I don't know. I don't know the differences, so let's go through them. So version 1, we have, the brand is Vans. The style is the Skate Era. It's $65. It's made in Vietnam, it weighs this much. So it's the classic vulcanized construction, the same way Vans has been building shoes since 1966. It's, got the legendary board feel, 50 years of proof that it works. And version 2 is the Skate Era Waffle Cup, and it's $75. It weighs this much, and it's also made in Vietnam. So it's a completely different construction method that Vans has never used on an Era before. Part Cupsole, part Volk, something in between that Vans is calling the most advanced outsole they have ever made. So we're gonna go over the 5 things that everyone needs to know about every single skate shoe, which is fit and flick, board feel, durability, cushion, and overall value. So for the fit and flick, it's surprising the $10 more expensive shoe actually fits better, but not for the reasons that you think. Both shoes are built on the same last, it's the same silhouette. You think they'd feel identical on foot, but they don't. So if you look at the heel profile, you can see that the normal Vans Era on this side kind of slopes in, like it's kind of making a V shape right here. And on the Skate Waffle Cup, it just sits very square. And that alone changes how it feels on your actual foot. Then there's the tongue. So the standard Era has no foam. It's flat, traditional, but on the Waffle Cup, it has a padded tongue. It's noticeably more structured, and it's also not made out of canvas. It's made of like jersey mesh. And on foot, the Waffle Cup just feels better. You feel more locked in, more intentional. And honestly, that's the one thing I didn't expect about these shoes, is them to fit very different, because it'd be crazy for them to build it on a completely new last. For the flick ranking, if 1 is really short and chody and 10 is really long and pointy, I might say they're both about a 6. They feel a little pointier than they actually look, but they are built on the same last with the same silhouette with a similar flick. But I'd say the fit is better on the Waffle Cup, but the flick is pretty identical. So if we go on to the board feel, so Vans claims they solved the biggest debate in skateboarding, Volk or Cupsole, but the numbers kind of say otherwise. And here's the oldest argument in skate shoes. Vulcanized soles give you board feel, Cupsoles give you protection, and every skater has had to pick one for 50 years. And Vans says the Waffle Cup gives you both. So we tested it with our patented flex test, which is where we push down and see how much force it takes to bend the outsole. So the standard Era took 13.5 pounds, but the Waffle Cup took 16 pounds. So the Waffle Cup needs 18% more force to flex. That's not your typical vulcanized board feel. That's more on the Cupsole range, but they're both pretty close. But the data doesn't lie. The Waffle Cup is measurably stiffer, and it does feel a little bit stiffer on foot. So if I had to rank the board feel, 0 is barefoot and 10 you're standing on huge mattresses, I'd say the standard Era is about a 4, and the Waffle Cup is probably a 4.5. It's close, but the Waffle Cup didn't solve the debate. It just moved it slightly in the Cupsole direction and kind of gave it a different name. So if we go to cushion, both of them just use this Pop Cush insole for the cushioning. So I'd probably rank them both about a 30, because vulcanized shoes, they don't have anything else. It's just the insole doing all the heavy lifting. So if we go to the most important part of this video, the durability, we'll do part 1, which will be the upper durability. So both shoes have suede uppers, but they're not the same suede shoe, and the differences are hiding in places most people never look. So on the standard Era, it's suede and canvas, clean, simple, traditional, but on the Waffle Cup, it's suede on the toe. The suede does look worse on the Waffle Cup, if we're being real. But on the lateral side, there's what looks like a faux leather panel, and on the medial side, a wide mesh panel that creates an actual air vent. We ran a breathability test so you can see the actual difference. So Vans actually engineered airflow into the Waffle Cup upper and barely told anyone about it, which I really like that, but I hate the fake leather. Fake leather is literally just plastic. Just look at the difference between the fake and real leather on the burn test. Then, of course, there's the stitching. So the standard Era is double stitched, but on the Waffle Cup, it's actually triple stitched. I always say more redundancy, more better on a skate shoe, because the stitching is the first thing to fail. So Vans quietly upgraded that and put it on a $10 more expensive shoe, which is a good call, honestly. I think every skate shoe should be triple stitched in the high wear areas for sure. Then we ran our abrasion test on the actual suede itself to simulate the real world flips and ollies and everything you do on a skate shoe. We have a machine, it rubs a sample of the suede against the mob grip tape, which is the grippiest grip, so it really shreds it. And 1,000 strokes and above is is my benchmark for solid durability. Anything else below is probably a little lacking and could be better. On the standard era suede, which does look better than this Wafflecup suede, it fails at 1,626 cycles, which is pretty good, honestly. And the Wafflecup suede fails at 1,394 cycles. So they're both in the same ballpark, which is good because this Wafflecup suede, it just looks a little hairier and honestly looks a little worse. But both have the extra rubber layers underneath, so the real world durability is pretty comparable, but the upper story strongly favors the Wafflecup in my opinion. Better breathability, better stitching, better pizza, Papa John's. But if we go to the durability part 2, the one that matters the most is the outsole durability. So Vans, they said they invented the new outsole construction, and we need to talk about what's actually inside it. So this is where it gets interesting because the Wafflecup isn't just a different tread pattern, it's a completely different manufacturing process. And understanding how it's built explains every single test result we got. So the standard Vans vulcanized outsole, the upper gets sewn to a lasting board, then they attach a flat sheet of rubber to the bottom, and then they wrap foxing tape strips around the outside. Then the whole thing goes into an autoclave, which is a pressurized oven, where all the individual rubber pieces cure together into one solid unit. So that's vulcanization. It's been done this way for like 100 years at least, and Vans has been doing it this way since 1966. But Wafflecup is different, and I had to ask a bunch of people to figure out how it's actually made because I wasn't sure the difference. So what happens is there's the first layer of foxing gets added, then instead of the flat sheet of rubber, they put on a pre-molded outsole. That's the cup sole element. Then another layer of foxing tape on top. Then they also go into the autoclave. So two slightly different construction methods fused into one shoe. And you can definitely see the differences here. Like this one's just the tape. It's classic vulcanized right here. And this looks more like a cup sole. So I think this whole part goes on. And then the puncture result is interesting because it suggests the molded outsole of the Wafflecup is slightly softer than the actual standard Volk rubber, which makes sense. Softer rubber flexes more, which is how Vans got the Boardfeel back into a molded sole, but softer rubber also punctures easier. So every design decision has a cost. The pre-cut durability ranking, I'd say they're both probably a 45 in the durability, around your average vulcanized durability scores. On paper, they're pretty identical, but they got there completely differently. So stick around till after the cut in half and I'll put them on a sander and really see what the differences are. So let's get these things chopped.
Guess how many cows worth of leather are stocked right here? Being cast counted them up like 500 cows worth. So we do scratch and dent sell to make sure that none of these scraps end up in the landfill because they used to be alive. And so we like to honor the animal, the leather, by discounting our products by 30%. So check out scratch and dent sell. Prevent all these beautiful former animals going to the landfill. Check it out below.
All right, so I got them both cut in half. I've seen a ton of comments about people roasting me for why I've been cutting them so diagonal, but it's to get the tests for the actual abrasion test because we need this much leather to run those tests, so that's why I gotta cut them right here because the toe is usually where the most leather is. Make sure to check out all of our handmade leather goods we make in the shop here. I'm always stoked about our belts. Like, I absolutely love our handmade leather belts. I am now a belt snob, especially for skating. These things last so long. Like, you can take slam after slam after slam, and these things just hold up, and they honestly look better after they get a little bit beat up and worn in. So go check out our belts for sure. Let's see what's inside, starting with the normal era and moving to the Wafflecup. So we got both shoes cut in half, and I expected to see completely different constructions inside, but what I actually found is more interesting than that. They look almost identical in cross-section. So your standard era outsole, it comes in about 55 to 60 Chore, which is your standard vulcanized hardness. It's about 6.5 millimeters thick, and then there's this full-length extra rubber layer that runs underneath almost every Vans I've cut. It's not super thick, it's not fancy, but it adds a small amount of shock absorption across the entire footbed. And then, of course, you have this black plastic stiffener piece in the back to keep the heel a little bit stiff, and then just the pop cushion insole. But if we go to the Wafflecup materials, you can see that there's two visibly different materials. So we measured them, and the gray outsole compound comes in about 60 to 65 Chore, and the gum outsole comes in around 60 Chore. Almost identical hardnesses and thicknesses, but that full-length rubber layer, the one in the standard era, is not in the Wafflecup. The Wafflecup goes straight from the molded outsole to the lasting board with no intermediate layer. It probably feels a little bit stiffer, and you feel a little bit less board feel because this rubber is actually harder. So both shoes end up in essentially the same structural place through completely different construction methods. So I ran the 30 seconds on a sander test on the toe cap, probably right around where most people would ollie and flick. Ran it on the toe where you're gonna pivot the most. That's where I always wear out the bottom of my insoles, is right here. And then I also did it on the middle where the waffle cup is different on here. So we ran it all over the entire shoe. All right, so here's the results. You can see on the toe cap, the waffle cup actually got a little bit more chewed through than the normal Era on the toe. But other than that, they're almost identical. On this toe, it did get a little bit less chewed through than this one, but not much. Yeah, that's weird. Weird results, right? I thought there would be more differences. And that kind of tells you something important about what the waffle cup actually is. So for the fit and flick, they're both a 6. It's the same last, same flick. The waffle cup fits a little bit better and the flick is pretty much identical. For the board feel, the Era is a 4 and the waffle cup is a 4.5. It's close enough that you probably wouldn't notice too much on foot after you've been skating, but the data says the waffle cup is a little bit stiffer and your feet might not agree. So the durability, I'd say they're both about a 45. They wear about the same. They're built a little bit differently, but they end up at the same place. For the cushion, I'd say they're both a 30. It's just the pop cushion soles. Neither is a mattress, both are skate shoes. That's the right answer. So for the value, I'd honestly put both of them at about a 60 for a value. Vans is one of the best examples of a massive brand using economies of scale to keep prices honest. $65 and $75 for purpose-built skate shoes in 2026 is a genuinely good value, which is crazy to say, but most brands at this construction level, they're charging $75 at least, some up to 90 plus if you're a smaller company. So which one should you buy? I personally would go Waffle Cup because I like that it's a little bit stiffer and I just like the way it fits a little bit better than the normal. The tongue padding makes a real difference. The triple stitching is a genuine upgrade. The air vent panel is a genuine upgrade, and you get all of that for $10 more. So the outsole story is a little bit more complicated than Vans marketing makes it sound. It's not the revolutionary hybrid I think that they're claiming, but I think it's a better shoe in the ways that affect daily wear. For me, personally, for sure. So the honest take on the Waffle Cup is this: diehard Era fans probably won't want to switch because they can't tell what's actually different. And after cutting both in half, the answer is not much. But if you're new to the Era, the Waffle Cup might be the version to start with, honestly. I like the Waffle Cup a little bit more just for the way it fits. So, 50 years of the Era, still one of the best shapes in skateboarding. Vans knows exactly what they have, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of what they did, honestly. Let me know what you guys think. Drop all your comments of your experience with both of these shoes down below. It's a really good resource for everyone to kind of round out the reviews. And let me know what else we should test. Anyways, that's it for me. I'm out.